Rain falls on Gotham the way it always does in November. Not gently, not kindly. It falls the way old debts fall due, steady, patient, certain of its arrival. It runs along the gargoyles of Wayne Manor, down through centuries-old stone, and finds its way, drop by drop, into the cave beneath. The Batmobile eases through the waterfall entrance a little after 3 in the morning. Its engine ticks as it cools, a slow metallic pulse in the dark, like something enormous settling into sleep. Batman sits inside for a moment longer than usual, not because anything happened tonight. Nothing did. 3 break-ins stopped, 1 warehouse fire prevented on the east side, a quiet night by Gotham standards, the kind of night that should feel like a small victory. He steps out into the cave, and the cave receives him the way it always has, without applause, without judgment, only sound. Water dripping somewhere far back in the dark, the low electrical hum of servers that never sleep, the distant waterfall, endlessly falling, endlessly the same. Alfred's light is off. It has been off for an hour now. Bruce noted the exact moment when he passed the manor's east wing on the way down, saw the crack beneath the door go dark, and felt something in his chest ease slightly, the way it always does when he knows the one person who worries about him most is finally resting. Tonight, the cave belongs only to him. He crosses the stone floor toward the console, footsteps echoing in that particular way that only this cave produces, a sound with weight to it, as though the mountain itself is listening. The cowl comes down. Bruce Wayne's face emerges from beneath it, tired around the eyes, in a way cowls are designed to hide from the world, but never from mirrors, and never from empty rooms. He reaches for the console more from habit than necessity, a final check before sleep. Weather reports, patrol logs, nothing urgent. Then the screen flickers. A single line of text appears, pale green against the black. Restricted archive. Access detected. Bruce goes very still. There are things in this world that are supposed to be impossible, and Bruce Wayne has built his entire life around eliminating the gap between supposed to be and actually is. He has plans for earthquakes, plans for solar flares, plans for the day Gotham finally decides it no longer wants saving. But this small, quiet notification blinking patiently on a screen no one else is meant to read, this was never supposed to happen. Only one archive on this entire system carries that classification. Only one archive requires a key that exists nowhere but in his own memory, layered beneath encryption, inside encryption, buried the way a man buries something he is ashamed of and afraid of in equal measure. The Contingency archive. He built it years ago, in a period of his life he does not like to revisit. Not long after Superman first arrived in Metropolis, not long after Bruce understood, with the particular clarity that keeps him awake most nights, that the world now contained beings capable of ending it by accident. Not through malice, through mistake, through grief, through a single bad day. So he had done what he always does when the world frightens him. He made a plan, then another, and another. Folder after folder, hero after hero, friend after friend, until an archive existed that no one, not Alfred, not Dick, not anyone he loved, was ever supposed to find. He types the passphrase. His fingers hesitate above the final key, the way they always do. Every single time he has done this across the years. Some part of him hopes, quietly, that the drive will simply refuse him, that some fail-safe will finally decide this knowledge should end with him and go no further. It doesn't refuse him. The screen dims, and a narrow section of the cave wall, one that has looked for as long as anyone but Bruce has known this cave, like nothing more than uneven rock, slides inward with a low mechanical breath. Behind it, a vault. Steel drawers, 10 of them, stacked in 2 neat columns, each labeled in his own handwriting, faded now with years. Dust has gathered along most of the seams, not all of them. He notices that immediately, the kind of detail he has spent his entire life training himself to notice. Some of these drawers have not been touched in a decade. One of them has dust, disturbed at the edge, fresh enough that it hasn't yet settled evenly back into place. He tells himself it could be nothing, a draft, vibration from the waterfall, the cave breathing the way old places do. But Bruce Wayne has never once in his adult life believed the simplest explanation when a more careful one was available. He crouches before the vault the way he might crouch before a body at a crime scene, with respect and with suspicion in equal measure. Above him, thunder moves slowly across Gotham, the kind that doesn't crack so much as roll, patient and low, like something enormous turning over in its sleep. He reaches for the first drawer. Superman. The metal is cold beneath his fingers. He hesitates only a moment before sliding it open, the way a man hesitates before reading a letter he wrote to himself in a darker year, uncertain whether he still agrees with the person who wrote it. The file begins. The folder is heavier than it should be for something made of paper. Bruce has always thought that certain files carry weight beyond their pages, the way certain memories do. He sets it on the desk beneath the small reading lamp, the one with the green glass shade that Alfred insists gives the cave a touch of dignity. And for a moment, he simply looks at the cover. One word, stamped in black ink years ago. Superman. Before he opens it, he lets himself remember, the way he rarely allows himself to. Not the Superman of headlines, not the Superman who lifts buildings or redirects hurricanes or stops trains with an outstretched hand. He thinks instead of a Tuesday 3 years ago when Clark showed up at the manor unannounced with a paper bag of takeout because he'd heard, through some quiet network of concern Bruce still doesn't fully understand, that Bruce hadn't slept in 4 days. He remembers Clark sitting at the kitchen table in the manor, tie loosened, glasses slightly crooked, laughing at something Alfred said, entirely unremarkable, entirely human in that moment. A farmer's son from Kansas who happens to carry a yellow sun's worth of power in his body and somehow still says please and thank you to a butler he's met perhaps a dozen times. That is the man this file is about, not a god. A man who chooses every single day to be kind, when kindness has never once been required of him. Bruce opens the folder slowly. The first pages are simple observation, years of it actually, though the file itself is short. Notes on temperament rather than power. Prefers de-escalation. Physically restrains himself even when restraint costs him pain. Has never, in recorded incident, struck first. Bruce remembers writing that line and feeling, even then, faintly ashamed of the file's existence, as though documenting a friend's goodness were itself a kind of betrayal. The power section is almost an afterthought, tucked near the back, because Bruce has always believed, and still believes, reading it now in the low green light, that Superman's abilities were never truly the danger. A man who could lift a mountain, and never has, is not a threat. A man who could lift a mountain and, on the worst day of his life, finally does. That is what the file exists to consider. The plan itself is written in the dry, clinical language Bruce reserves for the things he hopes never to use. Kryptonite, refined into a gas rather than a solid, calibrated to weaken rather than kill, because Bruce has never once written a contingency intended to end a friend's life, only to end a friend's rampage. A suit of armor, still incomplete in these older pages, designed less to overpower Clark than to survive being near him long enough to talk him down. Red sun technology, small enough to conceal in a signal device, meant to buy minutes rather than victory. But the final page, the one Bruce reads slowest every time he opens this file, isn't about kryptonite or sunlight at all. The greatest weakness Clark Kent possesses is not physical. It is his belief that he must never allow himself to become what he fears. If that belief is ever the thing pushed against him, if he is ever made to believe he already has failed, that is the moment he becomes most dangerous, and also the moment he is most reachable. Speak to the man, not the powers. He has always answered to the man. Bruce closes the folder gently, the way he might close a door on a room he doesn't want to wake anyone inside of. It is only as he sets it back into the drawer that he notices it. One page, near the middle, sits at a very slightly different angle than the rest. Turned perhaps 2 degrees, no more. The kind of misalignment a person would never notice unless their entire life had trained them to notice exactly this. He stares at it a long moment. He tells himself it's an old file. Papers shift, cabinets settle. He has opened this folder perhaps 4 times in a decade, but 4 times is enough for a page to have drifted. Still, he memorizes the angle before he closes the drawer. Old habits, he thinks, are rarely wrong twice in one night. The rain outside grows heavier. Somewhere far above, thunder answers it. Bruce reaches for the second drawer. The second drawer opens with the same low metallic sigh as the first. Inside, a folder slightly thicker, its edges worn soft, the way leather grows soft only through years of being carried, opened, and carefully put away again. Wonder Woman. Bruce holds it for a moment without opening it, the way one might hold a sword by its hilt and simply feel its balance before ever considering its edge. Diana has always struck him as something closer to weather than to a person, not because she is distant, but because she carries the particular certainty of something older than the room she stands in, older than the century, older, in some ways, than the country that adopted him. He remembers a rooftop, years ago, in the rain not unlike tonight's. Diana had found him there after a case that broke something in him he hadn't yet learned to name. She hadn't offered advice. She hadn't offered comfort in the way Clark might have, warm and immediate. She had simply sat beside him in silence for the better part of an hour, and when she finally spoke, she said only, "Even warriors are permitted to grieve, Bruce. It does not make the sword less sharp." He has never forgotten that sentence. He suspects he never will. The file opens to pages that read less like tactical assessment and more like philosophy, because that, Bruce has always believed, is the only honest way to study Diana. Her strength is documented, briefly, almost as a formality. The numbers matter less than what stands behind them. What matters is this: Diana Prince has never once, in any recorded instance, used her full strength against an opponent she still believed could be reasoned with. That, the file notes, is both her greatest virtue and the only door through which she could ever be stopped. Diana's discipline is not imposed from outside. It comes from training that began before she could walk, on an island where restraint was worshipped as fiercely as strength. To face her physically is to lose. To face her with dishonesty is to lose more slowly, but lose all the same. She reads deception in the body before it reaches the mouth. The only viable approach is one that never asks to defeat her, but instead asks her to choose restraint herself. She has always chosen it. The contingency, if it must exist, relies entirely on ensuring she is given that choice before violence removes it. Bruce pauses on that page a long time. He thinks, distantly, that this file has always frightened him more than most. Not because Diana is dangerous, though she is more dangerous than almost anyone he knows, but because the plan itself amounts to little more than hope she remains who she has always been. It is the thinnest contingency in the entire archive, and he has never once found a way to make it thicker, without it becoming something he'd be ashamed to have written. Perhaps, he thinks, that thinness is the point. Some people cannot be reduced to a plan. they can only be trusted, and trust, unlike strategy, cannot be engineered. As he moves to close the folder, something small slips loose from between the last 2 pages. A thin strip of paper, no wider than a bookmark, blank on both sides. He turns it over slowly under the lamp. Nothing. No writing, no mark. But it is clean, newer than the yellowed pages around it, as though someone placed it there recently, perhaps as a marker, perhaps by accident, and forgot to remove it. Bruce sets it beside the misaligned page from the first file on the corner of the desk and says nothing. Not yet. The cave answers with nothing but the waterfall's steady voice and the tick of a clock keeping time no one but him is awake to hear. He reaches for the 3rd drawer. The drawer marked Flash is lighter than the others, almost deceptively so, as though its contents weigh less than the danger they describe. Bruce has always found something fitting in that. Barry Allen has never been a heavy presence in any room he occupies. Quick, yes, restless, certainly, but never heavy. He moves through the world the way sunlight moves across a floor in the morning, here and then somewhere else entirely, leaving warmth behind rather than weight. Bruce remembers the first time he timed him, not officially, not for any file, simply out of professional curiosity during a joint case years ago. Barry had crossed 4 city blocks, disarmed 2 separate threats, and returned to Bruce's side before Bruce had finished exhaling the breath he'd taken when Barry left. And yet, when Bruce turned to thank him, Barry had looked faintly embarrassed, muttering something about hoping he hadn't been too showy about it. That is the strange, quiet joke at the center of this file. The fastest man alive has never once seemed to believe he deserves the title. The pages open with the obligatory data, speed thresholds, energy expenditure, the strange physics of the speed force that even Bruce, for all his study, admits he understands only partially. But, true to his method, the numbers occupy only a fraction of the file. The rest is something closer to a portrait of habit. Barry Allen thinks like a scientist, even while he moves like a blur. He follows patterns because patterns are safer than chaos, and his mind, even at incredible speed, still requires structure to organize what his body experiences in fractions of a second no other mind could process. He returns to familiar routes. He solves problems the way a detective does, methodically, even when the solving takes less than a heartbeat. This is the door. Bruce reads on, the low hum of the bat computer behind him like a second heartbeat in the room. Speed cannot be outrun. It can only be outthought. A contingency built to catch Barry does not need to be fast. It needs to be patient, and it needs to be several steps ahead of a mind that, however briefly, still thinks in sequence. Sound-based disorientation, calibrated to the specific frequency of speed force displacement, can create a half-second of confusion, insignificant to anyone else, an eternity to him. In that eternity, a trap built on his own habitual patterns closes before he understands he has entered it. The final line of the file, written in Bruce's own hand, is one he still remembers composing, late one night not unlike this one. Barry does not need to be defeated by force. He needs, on his worst day, to be given a single moment, still enough to think clearly. Everything after that he will likely solve himself. He always has. Bruce closes the file with something almost like a smile, faint and brief, gone before it fully forms. Of all the contingencies in this vault, this is the one he trusts least to ever be necessary. Not because Barry is weak, but because Barry has never once, in all the years Bruce has known him, needed to be stopped, so much as slowed down enough to remember who he is. He sets the folder back into its drawer and notices, only as the metal slides home, a faint mark near the drawer's rear edge. A smudge. Small. The kind of thing a fingertip leaves against dust that has otherwise gone untouched for years. He crouches, studies it beneath the lamplight, the way he has studied 1,000 crime scenes before this one. It isn't his own print. The angle is wrong, the size slightly smaller, pressed at a height that suggests someone reaching rather than standing at full extension. He does not have an answer yet. He commits the detail to memory instead, the way he has committed thousands of small anomalies to memory across the years, patient enough to know that answers arrive in their own time, usually all at once, usually when he least expects them. The fourth drawer waits. Green light flickers faintly across the folder's cover as the desk lamp catches something reflective embedded in the binding. A small fragment of alien metal Bruce keeps there deliberately. A tiny piece of a Green Lantern power battery given to him, half as a joke, half as a warning, by Hal Jordan himself, years ago. In case you ever need to remember what you're dealing with, Hal had said, grinning in that particular reckless way of his. Bruce turns the fragment gently between two fingers before setting it aside and opening the file beneath it. Hal Jordan has never been an easy man to write about, and Bruce suspects that's precisely why this file exists in a form different from the others, less a plan, more a study of contradiction. A test pilot who was, by his own admission, terrified of nearly everything before the ring chose him. A man whose greatest weapon draws its power not from strength or speed, but from the sheer, stubborn refusal to be afraid. The ring measures willpower, not virtue. This distinction matters more than any tactical detail in this file. Hal Jordan's will is formidable, but it is also, at times, reckless, shaped by instinct rather than patience. He does not calculate the way Diana calculates, or plan the way Barry plans. He commits, fully, immediately, to whatever the moment demands. This makes him extraordinarily difficult to predict, and equally difficult to intimidate. Bruce remembers a briefing years ago where Hal had argued, loudly and at length, that fear was simply data the ring hadn't gotten around to overriding yet. Bruce had found the description absurd at the time. He has come, slowly, to think it might be the most accurate thing anyone has ever said about the Green Lantern Corps. The contingency itself is built carefully around that idea. Not brute force, which the ring can shape into nearly anything given enough will behind it, but psychology. A frequency capable of amplifying dormant fear response just enough to disrupt the ring's construct stability. Not to harm Hal, but to remind his own subconscious, however briefly, of doubt. The file is explicit that this method is to be used only for seconds at a time and only as a last resort, because prolonged exposure risks something far worse than defeat. Do not underestimate what happens when a man built on the absence of fear is suddenly reacquainted with it. The goal is disruption, never despair. There is a difference, and it must never be forgotten. Bruce sits with that line longer than most others in the file. He has written a great many contingencies across the years that walk a careful line between stopping a friend and breaking one. This is among the most delicate. He thinks, briefly, of Hal's laugh, loud, easy, entirely unguarded in a way Bruce has never once managed to be, even among the people he trusts most. He thinks of how strange it is that a man so afraid of nearly everything before the ring has become the embodiment of courage to an entire sector of the universe. As he closes the file, the bat computer behind him emits a small, unfamiliar tone, barely audible, gone almost as soon as it begins. Bruce turns toward it immediately. On the main screen, for less than 2 seconds, a line of code flickers into existence and vanishes before he can fully read it. An access sequence. Unfamiliar. Not his own. By the time he crosses the cave floor to the console, the screen has returned to its idle state, offering nothing but the soft green glow of a system waiting patiently, as if it hadn't shown him anything at all. He stands there for a long moment, rain drumming steadily above him, the waterfall behind him whispering its endless syllable. Someone has been here. Recently enough that the system still remembers, even if only in fragments. He returns to the vault, 4 files opened, 4 small, quiet inconsistencies gathered like breadcrumbs across a floor he has walked 1,000 times before, and never once, until tonight, found altered. The 5th drawer waits, patient as the rain. The folder marked Aquaman smells faintly of salt, though Bruce knows that's impossible. The cave is nowhere near the sea, and the folder has sat undisturbed in a climate-controlled vault for years. And yet, the impression persists each time he opens it, as though some memory of ocean air had worked its way permanently into the paper the day the file was written. He remembers meeting Arthur Curry for the first time at a summit meant to formalize cooperation between the surface world and Atlantis. A room full of diplomats speaking carefully around subjects they didn't understand, and one man at the head of the table who understood both worlds better than anyone else present, and seemed faintly exhausted by the burden of explaining that fact over and over again. Arthur had leaned toward him during a particularly tedious exchange and murmured, "You'd think ruining an ocean would be simpler than this." Bruce had almost laughed. He rarely does in rooms like that. He remembers it because of how rare it was. The file, more than most, is concerned with politics rather than power, because Bruce has always believed that Arthur's true strength was never his trident, nor his ability to command the creatures of the deep, but his willingness to stand between 2 worlds that mostly wish to ignore each other, and insist, patiently, that they cooperate anyway. Arthur Curry's physical capabilities are considerable, strength sufficient to contend with peers far beyond ordinary human scale, resilience suited to pressures that would kill unaided men instantly, command over marine life that could, in a worst-case scenario, overwhelm coastal cities within hours. But Arthur is, first and foremost, a king. And kings are bound by something force alone cannot overcome: responsibility to those who depend on them. Bruce reads on, the lamp casting long shadows across pages that discuss trade agreements and ancient Atlantean law with the same careful attention most files reserve for tactical strength. The contingency here is not military, it is diplomatic. Any conflict severe enough to require action against Arthur would almost certainly stem from Atlantean politics rather than personal malice. A court intrigue, a usurper, an old law invoked against him. The correct response, therefore, is not confrontation, but alliance. Identify who in Atlantis remains loyal to Arthur's vision of peace, and support them quietly. Arthur does not need to be defeated. He needs to be reminded that the surface world stands with the man, not merely tolerates the king. Bruce sets the file down for a moment and looks toward the dark curve of the cave ceiling, where the sound of the waterfall grows briefly louder, as though the cave itself were exhaling. He thinks about leadership more than he expects to, reading this file, about how strange it is that the loneliest position in any given room is so often the one everyone assumes to be the strongest. Arthur carries 2 crowns that were never meant to be worn by the same head, and does so, as far as Bruce has ever observed, without complaint. He turns the last page and finds, tucked into the margin in his own handwriting from years ago, a short note he'd forgotten writing entirely. Trust him. He has more reason than any of us to walk away from both worlds, and he never has. Beneath that note, in the same ink, but in a hand that is unmistakably not his own, smaller, slanted differently, pressed lighter into the page, a single word has been added: agreed. Bruce stares at it for a long time. The handwriting is not Alfred's. He knows Alfred's hand as well as he knows his own. Decades of correspondence, notes left on kitchen counters, reminders tucked into cowl compartments. This is someone else's. He sits back slowly, the folder resting open on his knees, rain falling steadily somewhere far above him, and for the first time since the alert first appeared on his screen tonight, Bruce Wayne allows himself to consider a possibility he has been quietly avoiding. Someone he trusts has read these files, and whoever it is agrees with him. He closes the folder gently, sets it back into its drawer, and reaches, after a long pause, for the sixth. Of all the drawers in the vault, the sixth has always opened the slowest. Not because the mechanism is different, but because Bruce's hand has always hesitated slightly longer here than anywhere else. He notices it again tonight. Some habits are older than memory itself. Martian Manhunter. John Jones is, Bruce has always believed, the loneliest being he has ever known, and that belief alone has made this file harder to write than nearly any other in the archive. Superman lost a planet he barely remembers. John lost a planet he remembers entirely. Every face, every voice, every small detail of a life that no longer exists anywhere but inside his own memory. He is, in the truest and most painful sense, the last of his kind, walking among 7 billion strangers who will never fully understand what that means. Bruce remembers a night, years ago, sitting with Jean in the near silence of the watchtower's observation deck, both men saying very little, because Jean had once told him that silence, shared rather than endured alone, was the closest thing to comfort he'd found on Earth. Bruce had understood that more than he expected to. The file opens with power specifications that read, even to Bruce, as faintly absurd. Shape-shifting, invisibility, telepathy, strength exceeding nearly every metahuman on the planet, vulnerability to fire that borders on catastrophic given his psychological history with it. But true to form, Bruce has written almost nothing about these capabilities compared to the pages devoted to something far more delicate. Jean's greatest strength and greatest vulnerability are the same thing. His mind is never fully closed. He experiences the emotions of everyone around him constantly, a low current running beneath everything he does. He has learned, through decades of discipline, to manage this. But grief, if it reaches deep enough, has in the past overwhelmed that discipline entirely. Any contingency involving Jean must treat him first as a survivor of trauma, and only second as a threat. Bruce reads the next section slowly, the way he reads it every time, because it is, without exception, the most difficult paragraph in the entire archive to have written. If Jean Jones were ever compromised, mentally, emotionally, or through outside manipulation of his telepathy, the correct response is not confrontation. Telepaths cannot be outthought in the way speedsters can, nor overpowered in the way strength alone could address. The only viable approach is connection. Jean's isolation is his deepest wound. Anyone attempting to reach him during a crisis must approach not as an adversary, but as a companion, willing to share his grief rather than fight against it. This is not tactics. This is friendship, offered honestly at the exact moment it is hardest to offer. Bruce sits with the page a long moment, lamplight flickering faintly as a draft moves somewhere deep in the cave. He thinks of how strange it is that the file meant to describe how to stop someone has, in its final and truest form, become instructions for how to simply stay. He turns the last page. There, pressed flat against the inside back cover, is something that should not exist in this file at all. A single photograph. Old, slightly faded. It shows Jean, in his human disguise, the one he wears when walking among Gotham streets unnoticed, sitting across a small cafe table from someone whose face is turned just enough away from the camera that Bruce cannot immediately place it. He studies it closely under the lamp. The setting is unmistakably Gotham. The timestamp, printed faintly along the photograph's edge, is barely 2 months old. Bruce has no memory of this photograph being taken. He has no memory of placing it in this file. Someone else did. He sets it carefully on the desk beside the blank bookmark and the misaligned page from the first drawer. A small, quiet collection of anomalies now arranged like evidence at a crime scene that has not yet revealed its crime. Thunder rolls again above the cave, softer this time, as though the storm itself were beginning, slowly, to pass. Bruce closes the 6th file and reaches for the 7th. The 7th drawer hums faintly before it even opens, a small courtesy built into the mechanism itself, alerting whoever approaches that the file inside is, in some sense, still listening. Bruce built that feature deliberately, years ago, out of a respect he doesn't often extend to inanimate systems. Cyborg. Victor Stone has always occupied a strange, singular place among the heroes Bruce has studied, not because his abilities are the most dangerous, though they are considerable, but because Victor exists at the exact intersection Bruce has spent his entire life both fascinated by and quietly wary of. The line between human being and machine, worn thin enough in Victor's case that it barely exists at all anymore. Bruce remembers the first time he shook Victor's hand, the strange, careful way Victor had extended it, half expecting Bruce to hesitate, the way so many people still did around him. Bruce hadn't hesitated. He remembers Victor's expression shifting, almost imperceptibly, into something like relief. That memory has stayed with Bruce longer than he expected it to. The file itself begins, appropriately, with technical specification, processing speed, network integration capability, the alien motherbox technology fused permanently into Victor's body, capable of interfacing with nearly any system on Earth, given enough time. But Bruce, true to the pattern he has followed all night, spends most of the file elsewhere. Victor's greatest capability is also the archive's greatest concern: total integration with global networks. In a worst-case scenario, compromised or corrupted control systems could grant him access to infrastructure on a scale no other individual in this file possesses. Communications, financial systems, potentially even military assets, depending on the breach's severity. This is not a danger born from Victor's character, which remains, in every observed instance, remarkably steady given what he has endured. It is a danger born from what could be done to him, rather than by him. Bruce pauses on that distinction. He has always believed it to be the most important sentence in the file, and reading it again tonight, he still does. The correct contingency, therefore, is not built to stop Victor. It is built to protect him. An isolated fail-safe network, disconnected from the wider internet entirely, capable of severing any compromised link before it spreads. If it is ever activated, it should be understood not as an attack against a friend, but as a shield placed around a young man who has already sacrificed nearly everything just to remain a person, rather than becoming only a machine. Bruce closes his eyes briefly before turning the page. He thinks, not for the first time, that Victor's story is the one in this archive that troubles him least as a threat, and most as a tragedy. A young man who nearly died, saved by technology that then reshaped every remaining part of his life without ever once asking his permission. Bruce understands, more than most, what it means to have a single terrible night rewrite the entire shape of who you become. The final page of the file is shorter than most, almost abrupt by comparison. Victor does not need a contingency built against him. He needs one built beside him. If I am ever gone, ensure someone remains who remembers there is still a person inside all that machinery, because the day everyone forgets that is the day the danger this file describes actually becomes real. Bruce sits with that final line for a long moment, the cave quiet around him, except for the waterfall's endless patience and the faint electrical hum from the console nearby. He notices, only as he moves to close the folder, that the drawer's internal sensor, the same one that lets out its small greeting hum when opened, is currently displaying a soft, almost invisible indicator light near its base. A light that only appears, according to the system's original design, when the drawer has been opened and closed more than once within a short span of time. Bruce studies it in silence. He has opened this drawer only once tonight, which means, according to the system's own quiet memory, someone opened it before he did. He closes the file, sets it back into place, and stands there a moment longer than necessary, listening to the cave the way he has always listened to Gotham itself, waiting, patiently, for the smallest sound to explain the largest question. None comes. Not yet. He returns to the vault and reaches for the 8th drawer. The 8th folder is thinner than most, and lighter in tone somehow, even before Bruce opens it, as though the paper itself remembers something the other files don't. Shazam. Bruce has always approached this file differently than the others, because Billy Batson is, more than any other name in this archive, still a child. A 14-year-old boy from Philadelphia who happened to be chosen by an ancient and slightly bewildering wizard to carry the combined power of 6 mythological figures whenever he speaks a single word. He remembers meeting Billy for the first time, not as Shazam, towering and impossibly strong, but afterward, transformed back, sitting on a curb outside a diner, looking, for all the world, like exactly what he was. A kid who'd had an extraordinarily strange day and wanted, more than anything, a milkshake. Bruce had bought him one. He isn't sure why he remembers that detail so clearly, except that it felt, at the time, like the only appropriate response to meeting someone who held the power of Solomon's wisdom and Hercules' strength. And yet still ordered chocolate over vanilla because, in his words, chocolate's just better. I don't make the rules. The file itself reflects that duality carefully. As Shazam, Billy Batson possesses power comparable to, and in specific circumstances exceeding, several of the other individuals catalogued in this archive. Strength, speed, flight, and elemental control drawn from 6 ancient sources. As Billy, he remains, fundamentally, a child, still learning who he is, even without considering the power he carries. Any contingency involving him must never forget this. Power this vast in the hands of someone this young is not, by itself, dangerous. It becomes dangerous only if that child is ever made to feel alone with it. Bruce reads on slowly, the lamp casting a soft warmth across the page that feels, somehow, gentler than the light over the other files. The transformation itself offers the only viable safeguard. Billy becomes Shazam by speaking a single word, and reverts to himself by speaking it again, whether willingly or not, in moments of sufficient surprise or distress. A contingency built around Billy should never target the power directly. The risk of harming a child in the process is unacceptable. It should instead focus entirely on reaching Billy, the boy, in whatever way possible, trusting that if he hears a familiar voice, he will choose, on his own, to step back from whatever has gone wrong. Bruce sits with that for a long moment. He has written contingencies in this archive built on strategy, on psychology, on decades of tactical study. This one, more than any other, is built on something closer to faith. Faith that a good kid, given power beyond his years, will remain a good kid, provided the people around him remember to treat him like one. The final line of the file is written in smaller handwriting than the rest, added, Bruce recalls, sometime after his first draft. He is a better person than most adults I know. Do not let anyone forget that, including him. Bruce closes the folder carefully, the way one might close a photo album rather than a case file, and sets it back into its drawer. As the drawer slides shut, he notices, faintly, barely enough to register, a warmth to the metal edge that shouldn't be there. Not heat, exactly. More like the residual trace of a hand having rested there recently. The kind of warmth that fades slowly in a room this cold, this stone, this old. He touches it briefly with the back of his fingers, the way a detective might touch a doorknob to judge how recently it was turned. Recent. Very recent. Someone was here tonight, possibly hours before he was. Possibly, he realizes with a small, quiet chill he does not often allow himself to feel while he was still out on patrol. He glances toward the manor above, toward the dark hallway where Alfred's light went out hours ago, and toward the empty spaces of the cave where no one else is supposed to have access. He says nothing aloud. The cave offers no answer of its own beyond the waterfall's steady voice, patient as ever, indifferent to mysteries. 2 drawers remain untouched. Bruce turns toward the 9th. The 9th drawer is different from the others before Bruce even opens it, and he feels that difference the way one feels a change in air pressure before a storm arrives, a subtle tightening somewhere behind the ribs. This drawer holds not 1 folder, but 4, arranged carefully side by side, each one worn far softer than any file that came before it. Years of handling have rounded their corners. Coffee rings mark 2 of the covers, faint and old. These are not files Bruce reads once and returns to a decade later. These are files he has opened more times than he could ever accurately count. Late at night, for reasons that have very little to do with contingency planning and everything to do with worry. Nightwing, Batgirl, Robin, Red Hood. He lifts them together, the way he always does, because separating them has never once felt right to him. They belong together the same way the people they describe have adults of, from some complicated and occasionally fractured way, belong together. He opens Dick's file first, because he always does. Dick Grayson, the first Robin, the man who became Nightwing, who left not out of anger, but out of the simple necessary need to become his own person, rather than an extension of Bruce's mission. Bruce remembers, with a clarity that still catches slightly in his chest, the exact night Dick told him he was leaving. He remembers being proud and devastated in the very same breath, and not knowing at the time which feeling to show. Dick Grayson's combat ability rivals my own, refined through years of training that began before he could fully understand what it meant to lose a family in front of a crowd of strangers. His judgment is, in most circumstances, better than mine, steadier, less clouded by anger. If Dick were ever compromised, it would not be through weakness. It would be through betrayal by someone he trusts completely, because trust, more than any weapon, is the only thing that has ever truly disarmed him. Bruce reads that line slowly, the way he has read it many times before, and feels, as he always does, a small ache settle behind his sternum. Barbara's file comes next. Batgirl, Oracle, a young woman who survived an act of violence that would have ended most careers, most lives, and instead rebuilt herself into something Gotham quietly depends on more than it will ever fully know. Barbara Gordon's intelligence exceeds nearly everyone catalogued in this archive, myself included, in matters of information systems and network security. Any contingency built around her must account for the fact that she will likely detect it being built in the first place. The only honest approach is transparency. Barbara has earned the right to know exactly what this file says about her, should she ever ask. Bruce pauses on that line for a long moment. He has never once shown her this file. He wonders, quietly, whether that omission is a failure of the honesty he claims to believe in. Jason's file is the hardest. It always has been. Robin, once. Then gone. Then returned as something angrier. Something that broke Bruce's rules in ways that still, even now, keep him awake more nights than he would ever admit aloud. Jason Todd's file exists less as a contingency and more as a record of failure. Mine, not his. I failed to protect him once, and failed again to reach him afterward in the ways he needed rather than the ways I assumed he needed. If Jason is ever a danger, it will not be because he has become evil. It will be because grief convinced him that violence and justice are the same word. The only contingency that has ever mattered here is the one I continue to fail to complete, proving to him that I never stopped seeing him as my son, even in the years I said nothing at all. Bruce sits with that paragraph the longest of any in the archive tonight. Outside, thunder rolls once more, distant now, softer, as though the storm itself understood it had arrived at a moment requiring quiet rather than noise. Tim's file is shorter, gentler in tone. The third Robin, the one who found his way to this life not through tragedy alone, but through sheer, quiet observation, noticing what no one else had noticed, and simply refusing to look away. Tim Drake possesses the sharpest analytical mind of anyone in this family, myself included in certain respects, and the emotional maturity to know when strategy must yield to compassion. If Tim were ever endangered from within, it would be from carrying too much alone, believing, as he often does, that asking for help is itself a kind of failure. He has never once been a burden. I hope, someday, he believes that as completely as I do. Bruce closes each folder slowly, one after another, and stacks them together exactly as he found them. It is only as he lifts the small clip that binds them that he notices the anomaly waiting patiently beneath. A fifth slip of paper, tucked beneath the stack, in handwriting he recognizes instantly. Not because it matches his own, but because he has seen this particular handwriting on birthday cards, on training notes left in the Manor's kitchen, on the corner of case files, years ago, when a boy still learning to be Robin used to leave him quick, quiet observations before Bruce even asked for them. It reads simply, "You never needed a contingency for us, Bruce. You needed to trust that we'd choose to stay good on our own. We always have, even when it was hard." Bruce stares at the note for a long, long moment, the cave silent around him except for water and wind and the slow, patient rhythm of his own heartbeat. He does not need to check the handwriting against old letters to know, with quiet certainty, exactly who wrote it. But knowing raises far more questions than it answers. When? How long ago? And, most importantly, why now, tonight, of all nights, does this particular note make itself known? He sets the family files back into their drawer with more care than he has shown any file all evening, and turns, finally, toward the last drawer in the vault, the 10th. The last drawer is the heaviest of all 10, and Bruce feels that weight the moment his fingers close around its handle. Not because the folder inside is thick, it isn't, surprisingly thin compared to nearly everything that came before it, but because of what its existence represents. Justice League. Total contingency. He remembers writing this file last, after all the others, on a night very much like this one, years ago, when the weight of everything he'd already documented finally became too heavy to leave unfinished. If Superman fell, if Diana fell, if every single one of them, together, all at once, became something the world needed protecting from, what then? What plan exists for the day every safeguard fails simultaneously? He opens the folder slowly, aware, as he always is with this particular file, that its very existence says something uncomfortable about him that he has never fully made peace with. The pages inside are sparse compared to the others, not because Bruce lacked ideas, but because he made a deliberate choice, writing this file, to resist the temptation toward elaborate machinery, and instead write something closer to a confession. If every member of the League were simultaneously compromised, corrupted, controlled, or turned by some force beyond anyone's current understanding, no single weapon, no single strategy could reasonably succeed against that combined threat. I do not believe such a contingency should exist in the form of an attack. I believe, instead, that the only honest answer to that scenario is this. Identify whichever among them retains the most independent will, and trust them completely to lead the others back, the way I have watched each of them, individually, choose to remain good across every crisis I have observed. Bruce reads that paragraph slowly, twice, the way he does whenever guilt threatens to outweigh reason. This file exists not because I believe my friends are dangerous. It exists because I have learned, across a lifetime of losses, that even good people can be turned into weapons against their will, and that failing to prepare for that possibility is its own kind of negligence. But preparation is not the same as suspicion. I trust every person named in this archive more than I trust myself on most nights. That is precisely why these files had to be written with such care, because the day I stop respecting them enough to study them honestly is the day I become the danger this archive was built to prevent. Bruce sits back slowly, the final page resting in his hands, rain still falling somewhere far above him, steady, unhurried, patient as it has been all night. He thinks for a long moment about what it means to love people enough to imagine the worst version of them, purely so you'll never have to face it unprepared. He thinks about how strange and lonely that particular kind of love is, the kind that plans quietly in the dark, so the people it protects never have to know how frightened it once was on their behalf. He closes the final file gently, the way one closes a door on a room they hope never to enter again, and sets it back into the drawer beside the others. 10 files, 10 friends, 10 quiet admissions of fear disguised as strategy. And, scattered across the desk beside him, a misaligned page, a blank strip of paper, a smudge of dust from an unfamiliar hand, a flickering line of code, a handwritten word of agreement, an old photograph, a lingering warmth on cold metal, and a note that could only have come from someone he raised himself. 8 small anomalies. 8 quiet signs that someone has walked this exact path before him tonight, or in recent weeks, moving carefully, respectfully, through the most guarded secrets Bruce Wayne has ever written. He gathers each piece of evidence into his palm, the way he might gather fragments of a case that has finally, after hours of patient work, begun to resolve itself into a single shape. He rises slowly, the cave creaking faintly around him in that old, familiar way stone settles after a long night, and turns toward the vault's final drawer, the empty slot he noticed, without quite registering it, the moment the vault first opened hours ago. The 11th slot has always existed in the vault, tucked at the very back of the second column, unlabeled, reserved. Bruce built it that way deliberately, years ago, for a file he never finished writing. A contingency for himself, for the day Bruce Wayne might become the very thing every other file in this archive was built to prevent. He has never once completed it. Some drafts, he has decided over the years, are meant to remain unfinished, not from neglect, but from the quiet hope that finishing them would mean admitting a possibility he still, after everything, refuses to fully accept. Tonight, reaching toward that final slot out of habit more than expectation, his fingers find nothing. The drawer is empty, not broken, not forced. The lock mechanism shows no sign of damage, no scratch marks, no trace of tampering that any ordinary intrusion would leave behind. Whoever removed the file did so calmly, deliberately, with a key that should not exist anywhere but inside Bruce's own memory. He stands very still for a long moment, listening to the cave the way he has listened to it 1,000 times before, waiting for it to tell him something it has never been able to tell him. water falling somewhere in the dark, thunder retreating slowly across a city, finally beginning to quiet down for the night, the soft, patient hum of machines that have watched this entire evening unfold and offered no opinion of their own. He crosses to the console and pulls the security log, the true one, buried 3 layers beneath the surface interface, the one no intrusion detection was ever meant to trigger, because it was never meant to be found by anyone but him. The log scrolls slowly across the screen. Weeks of quiet, uneventful entries, stretching backward through routine system checks and scheduled backups, until, near the middle of the list, a single entry appears that does not match any authorized access Bruce has on record. A date, 7 weeks ago. A time, shortly after midnight. And beside it, instead of his own credentials, a set of access codes that predate even his memory of creating them. Codes belonging, according to the system's oldest records, to someone the Bat computer was configured years ago, in a quieter and more trusting season of Bruce's life, to always recognize. The identity itself remains deliberately unlisted. Bruce built the system that way on purpose long ago. A small mercy extended to whoever might one day need access to this vault without having to carry the burden of being recorded doing so. He sits with that realization for a long moment, the cave breathing quietly around him, and finds, to his own quiet surprise, that he does not feel afraid. He feels, instead, something closer to relief. Whoever walked this path before him tonight did not come to steal these secrets, or expose them, or use them against the people they describe. They came carefully, respectfully, leaving behind nothing but small signs of their passing. A shifted page, a borrowed bookmark, a word of quiet agreement, an old photograph kept safe, a note of gentle reassurance tucked exactly where they knew Bruce would eventually find it. They came, he realizes, for the same reason he built this archive in the first place. Not suspicion, not fear. Love, wearing the careful disguise of preparation. Bruce leans back slowly in his chair, the 11th file still missing, its absence no longer feeling like an unsolved mystery, so much as a quiet message from someone who trusted him enough to leave a piece of himself unfinished in his hands. He thinks, distantly, that some questions are better left exactly where they are, not because the truth would be unwelcome, but because certain truths mean more when they're allowed to remain gently unspoken between people who already understand each other. Above him, the rain begins finally to soften. The storm, that has moved patiently across Gotham all night, finally loosens its grip, retreating toward the harbor the way storms eventually always do, leaving behind only the sound of water settling quietly into drains and gutters across a city that will wake in a few hours, having no idea how close it came, tonight, to secrets it was never meant to see. Bruce gathers the small collection of anomalies from his desk, the page, the bookmark, the photograph, the note, and instead of returning them to their separate files, places them together in a single small envelope, sealed, and sets it gently into the empty 11th slot. Not a contingency, not a plan. A quiet acknowledgement that some mysteries are meant to be carried rather than solved. He closes the vault slowly, the stone wall sliding back into place with the same low mechanical breath it made hours ago, sealing the archive once more into the patient dark it has occupied for years, and will likely occupy for years still. The Bat computer dims as he powers it down, screen fading gently from bright green to a soft, fading glow, then to nothing at all. The cave grows quiet around him, truly quiet now. The storm above finally reduced to a gentle patter against stone, the waterfall's voice softer somehow in the absence of thunder. the clock on the far wall ticking steadily through a night that has, at last, nearly ended. Bruce climbs the stairs slowly, past sleeping monitors and darkened trophies, past a cave that has kept his secrets faithfully for longer than most friendships last, and pauses briefly at the top, looking back one last time into the dark. Somewhere down there, in a vault beneath a mountain, 10 files remain. Quiet records of a man who loves his friends enough to imagine losing them, and trusts them enough to hope he never has to use a single page of what he's written. And somewhere beyond that, in a small sealed envelope in an empty 11th slot, a mystery rests quietly too. Not solved, not entirely, but understood well enough in the way that truly matters. Bruce turns off the last light, and the cave settles fully into darkness behind him. Above, the rain continues to fall over Gotham, softer now, gentler. The kind of rain that no longer insists on anything, content simply to fall and be heard. And eventually, quietly, stop. The city sleeps. The cave sleeps. And somewhere within it, at last, so does Bruce Wayne.